There is a teaching in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, Jewish timeless wisdom, which we learn on Tuesday nights. It says the following: Hazman katzar, time is running short. Va'melacha meruba. Zman katzar is we're only here for several decades. Amelucha meruba, the work is tremendous, to perfect ourselves as best we can and to contribute our fair share to the fixing of the world and human society. Va'poalim atzelim, and the workers are lazy. That's us, at least me. We press snooze in the morning. Uval abayit dochek, and the master of the house, the boss, not Tony from Who's the Boss, but God Almighty, the real boss, with a capital B, not to be confused with Hugo Boss. Dochek beseeches us. By the way, my brother alerted me.
You're on a tear today, I see.
My brother alerted me a few years ago that Hugo Boss used to make the Nazi uniform.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I stopped purchasing Hugo Boss. It's just a personal preference. Yeah. I still have maybe a couple of ties or something, but I don't make new. I guess it's an emotional thing,
Yeah.
Anyway, so what's going on that there's so much work? Of course, next Friday night, Bezrat Hashem, 8 nights from tonight, we're all sitting around the Seder table. This Shabbat was a particularly busy Shabbat, but let's focus on this coming Shabbat and Pesach. So this Shabbat has a nickname. The Shabbat before Pesach has a nickname, just like the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur also has a nickname. What's the nickname of the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Shabbat Shuvah, like Teshuvah. Shabbat, the Shabbat of return. Return to your inner core. Return to the root of your soul in godliness. And this Shabbat before Pesach is called Shabbat Hagadol, the Great Sabbath. Not to be confused with the heavy metal band Black Sabbath, right, Melissa? So why is it called Shabbat Hagadol? Because we are readying ourselves for the big event, which is Pesach. Pesach is the Exodus. First and foremost, it's a political exodus from centuries of enslavement and dehumanization. Something very unique about the Jewish story is that our ethos, our foundational narrative, our story is that we were downtrodden and oppressed and dehumanized. We underwent genocide when the Pharaoh declared a genocide on all the male Jewish infants, right? Should be thrown to the Nile. So, a lot of peoples, a lot of nations tell themselves an antithetical story. We were always in our land, and we were always strong, and we were always here. Ours is a story of outsiders. It starts with Abraham, who is the lonely man of faith. He's from one side of the river, the sages say, the rest of the world on the other side of idolatry. And it continues with our situation in Egypt. So our story is the story of the underdogs. So we have political emancipation from slavery, but ultimately the goal of the political exodus is spiritual exodus. Trying to become great people. People who are decent and kind, people who are learned, people who are connected to their spiritual roots in Torah, and people who are fine Americans and fine human beings. To become great people, right? To become people of stature. For that, Hashem gave us the Torah. That's the ultimate purpose of political freedom, is spiritual freedom. Okay? So this Shabbat is called Shabbat Hagadol, as I said, and there is a special haftarah which goes with this Shabbat. We're not going to read the Haftarah of the specific Torah portion that we read this Shabbat, which is called Tzav, which means you shall command. It's the second Torah portion in the book of Leviticus, the Torah portion that deals with sacrifices. Today we don't sacrifice of our animals and crops like we did when we were in agricultural society. Today we're in information technology age, so we sacrifice, if you like, of our time when we come before Hashem in prayer, when we volunteer in the community and so forth. So we're not reading the prophetic reading, the Haftarah, which corresponds to the weekly parashat. We're reading the one that's special before Pesach for this Shabbat, called Shabbat Hagadol. And
Should we just, for one question?
yeah,
Why would we, I mean, I can understand because we were leaving Egypt and there was a lot of pagan rituals, and one of the pagan rituals may have been animal sacrifices. Is that sort of why we adopted animal sacrifice? I know in the ancient world, everybody was...
Well, it's a good question. It's a very long conversation, you know. There are two views. One view is the view that you just articulated that we get from Maimonides. Maimonides was an arch rationalist. So from Maimonides, the sacrifices were a necessary phase in spiritual maturation. Human sacrifice was rampant in the ancient world. The Hebrew word for hell, Gehennom, comes from a valley outside Jerusalem called Gei, which means hell in Hebrew, Ben Hinnom. So in that valley, there were idolatrous practices where people would thrust their firstborn infants into the fire to appease the deities. So the idea is that, you know, after the golden calf farce, Hashem may have realized, and Moses, that the people are ill-prepared for a completely spiritual monotheism. So give them something tangible. So let's take one step removed from human sacrifice, it's animal sacrifice. That's the Maimonidean view, that it was a stepping stone. Okay? Welcome. Please grab yourself a prayer book. Welcome, Judith. Help yourself to whatever you like. And others claim that there is intrinsic merit to the sacrifices, that the sacrifices are like giving away money or time today. Agricultural society, so that's your capital. People didn't have stocks and bonds and securities and money in their checking and savings account. They had animals and crops, and that's how you gave to sustain the temple, and that's how you gave to show your devotion to God. So there are different views about this. Now, by the way, I like to think that every book of the 5 books of the Torah has one central theme, which is a central theme to the human condition. The first book, Genesis, is about family and its discontents. Adam and Eve blame each other who made the other eat from the tree. Cain murders his brother Abel. Sarah can't get along with Hagar, Yitzchak and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, until finally Joseph and his brothers get it right at the end. It's also the birth of responsibility. As the book of Genesis progresses, humanity learns how to take responsibility. You know, you have Noah, who was a great guy, but he didn't take responsibility for his generation to try and get them on the right path. But Abraham did. And then we have the book of Exodus, which is, I like to call it the book of destiny, because we receive the Torah after we leave Egypt. So we move to use terms used by Rabbi Soloveitchik, the great 20th century sage, we move from fate to destiny. What's the difference between fate and destiny? Fate is that we have to go to work, and we have to pay the mortgage, and we have to support our children and grandchildren, whoever we need to help. Fate is the fact that you're thrust into the world and it's sink or swim. That's fate, right? The ancient Greek view of life was life as tragedy. Life is just cyclical, right? Summer, fall, winter, spring. Summer, fall, winter. You can't get out of it. It's like a hamster's wheel. We believe in redemptive time. Ever since the prophets, we believe that humanity is moving to a destination. And we live by the Torah. We not only have a fate of being another cog in the world economy, we also have a destiny. Paul Johnson, the great Catholic historian of the Jews, wrote in his book, A History of the Jews, that the Jewish people taught humanity more than any other group, consistently and over a very long span, that history has meaning, that we're actually going somewhere, right? We used to be savages, now we have democracies. History has meaning, and humanity has a destiny. We're not just here. There's more to life than the socio-economic aspect, the material aspect of existence. So that's what the book of Exodus tells us. We get the Torah, we get our mission statement. Now we started the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus is the book of holiness. We have in parashat, the Torah portion of Kedoshim, we're going to read Bezat Hashem, the Pesach. That's the holiness code of Judaism. If you open parashat Kedoshim, it's very interesting because most of it is really morality. How to be a decent employer, how to be a decent person. And most of the book of Leviticus is about the holiness of the Kohanim. But the Kedoshim, which is a very sublime parasha, talks about holiness for all people, for all the Jewish people. Right? And before we received the Torah, God said to us, I want you all to be Mamlechet Kohanim. I want all Jews to be a kingdom of priests. Right? You're all called upon for spiritual leadership. All right. And, after that, we'll have the book of Numbers, which is, I call it the book of failure, because Moses and Aaron failed by hitting the rock. Korach and his entourage failed by challenging Moses' leadership. The 10 of the 12 spies fail when they come with a defeatist attitude. So failure is an organic part of life, and it's a very important book. It teaches us, amongst many other things, that we're going to fail. We're going to have heartache in life. Because the Torah shows life as it really is. We call it in the Amidah Torat Chaim, a Torah of life, not a fairy tale. So we see people who are broken and people who are in great pain. We see Moses at some point saying to Hashem, Horgeni naharog. If you're not going to help me with people, might as well kill me now. Horgeni naharog, kill me and let me be killed. He basically has like a breakdown. He doesn't get to go into Israel. So he teaches us that it's just part of life. We're all going to suffer failures and heartbreaks. Even Moses, the greatest Jewish leader of all times, didn't fulfill and achieve his lifelong dream, which was to enter Israel. As our sages say, nobody leaves this world with half their desires fulfilled. Right? And lastly, we have the book of Deuteronomy, Dvarim. That's the book of legacy. That's a series of speeches that Moses gives in the first person in the last few weeks of his life. So now we have parashat Tzav. Parashat Tzav.
It starts on page 521.
521 in the Jewish book. 521. So 521. וידבר השם אל משה לאמור. It's the last two lines. And God spoke to Moses, saying, command Aaron and his sons. Tzav. Tzav it reminds you of a certain word. The word tzav, does it remind you of a certain word? Mitzvah. It's the same root as mitzvah. What's a mitzvah?
Tzav.
What is a mitzvah?
Commandment.
So it's
A
the
commandment.
root of mitzvah?
Sorry?
It's the root of mitzvah?
Yeah. So it's not, one of the grossest mistranslations in American Judaism is that a mitzvah is a good deed. But it's not a good deed. It's a commandment. It's a spiritual or ethical commandment. For example, now you're not going to eat bread for 8 days, right? On Pesach?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good deed. It's a commandment that Hashem gave us.
I
I
think
don't
you
see
asked,
that as a mitzvah.
It is a mitzvah. Because people say colloquially, maybe you can do a mitzvah, help this person.
That's
And
to
that,
me it's a
and
mitzvah.
that's fine. But really,
But are we commanded to do those to help people?
yeah,
So it is.
yes,
a
it is a mitzvah.
Yeah.
But ultimately, a mitzvah is the set of laws that we got. Not to eat on Yom Kippur, to fast on Yom Kippur, is a mitzvah. To say the kiddush and light candles on Shabbat is a mitzvah. It's a set of obligations. There's a difference between obligation and good deed. Good deed is, if somebody passes by and I give them a good amount of money. It's a good deed. I'm not necessarily obligated to give to that person who just passed.
Richard, if you ask 100 Jews
I
in
know.
America, 99 will say mitzvah is a good deed.
To me,
yeah.
it has a-
Also, I'll give
the
you more
others,
than
I
that.
take them as a command. Or the,
Yeah, because it's a little foreign to the American culture, the idea of taking on a set of obligations. I think in some ways. Now, take the sixth commandment, for example, of the 10 Commandments. Lo tirtzach. It's translated as "Thou shalt not kill." It's completely wrong. It says "Lo tirtzach," which means "You shall not murder." Big difference between "You shall not kill" and "You shall not murder," right? If it were "You shall not kill," we should have sat and done nothing in World War II and let the Nazis and the Japanese take over. We should sit still now and let ISIS take over the world, right? But no, it says "You shall not murder." Big difference. So a mitzvah is a spiritual or moral obligation. Right? The spiritual obligation would be, let's say, to say the Shema every day. The moral obligation would be, what would be a moral obligation?
Give tzedakah.
Give tzedakah, that's a good example, right? But there's a deeper level to the word mitzvah. Mitzvah is also connected symbolically to the Hebrew word tzavta. Tzavta means togetherness. So a mitzvah is really a vessel, a tool for togetherness. What does that mean? Tomorrow night, if you're going to be in a Friday night dinner with family or friends for Shabbat, on the external level, you're fulfilling the mitzvah, the obligation of honoring Shabbat. But the deeper level is that by virtue of performing the mitzvah, you're creating intimacy, love, togetherness. You're bonding with the people around you and with God. So ultimately, the inner core of the mitzvah is about creating love and intimacy and togetherness. It's a bonding mechanism. Every mitzvah that you do either solidifies, strengthens, deepens your relationship with God or with other people, or both. Right? Now, here's the thing, many of the parashot in this book of Vayikra Leviticus are very difficult for us to connect to, because they're talking about all these esoteric rituals that took place in antiquity, in temple times. Today we have no temple. We don't go about bringing forth these offerings. So, came the Hasidic rabbis, the mystics, in the 1700s to today. And what do? They take these historical commandments that don't really pertain to our day and age, and they interpret them in a way that could be relevant and spiritually invigorating for us today in the year 5778, 2018. So, for example, it says several times in our parashat, for example, on verse 6, there shall be on page 523, there shall be a constant fire kept burning on the altar without being extinguished. In Hebrew, esh tamid, a perpetual fire, tukad ala mizbeach. A perpetual fire should be burning on the altar. It shall not be extinguished. And notice here the emphasis, a perpetual fire shall not be extinguished. So how do the Hasidim understand this? In a very brilliant way, a very deep way. They say, when you are spiritually in the zone, when you are, let's say, on a given Shabbat and you're in synagogue and you're so connected to the service and the Amidah, you really feel you're connected spiritually, then there is a perpetual fire within you. So they're saying the perpetual fire within us to Hashem should never be extinguished. We should always cultivate it, right? Remember when you went to a bonfire sometime in your life, and especially if you were a teenager or something, so what do? You always kind of make sure that the fire doesn't run out, right? You put in another piece of wood, right? So the same thing, the Hasidic masters are telling us that's what you should do with your soul. Go do another mitzvah, go check on somebody else who needs help, go volunteer, go to another prayer, go to another Torah class. Keep on pumping the fire, the light. It shall not be extinguished. Don't neglect your spirituality. Just like you need to take your car to the gas station, otherwise it'll get stuck. Similarly, the neshama could get stuck and stagnated if you don't constantly, put in more wood, right? So it's a very nice idea.
And then also the eternal flame in the temple. Is that
yes,
symbol of it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the pshat. That's the original contextual meaning, right? And the Hebrew word for sacrifice, korban, is from the same root, practically the same word almost, as the word karov, which means close. Which comes to teach us...
Bon and what's the other word?
Karov.
Karov.
Right? So...
And it means close.
Yeah. So... Yeah, like a relative. Karov. So what can we learn from this? It means that
sacrificing brought us closer to God.
The sacrifices bring us closer to God. And whenever you sacrifice, whenever you go out of your comfort zone in a relationship, you are deepening the relationship, right? You give so much to your kids, you have a deep relationship with your kids. You give in a spousal relationship, it's a give and take, right? And of course to God. So it's a very important teaching that we all have to come out of our comfort zones in order to have relationships in general, whether it's friends, relatives, it doesn't matter. It's an important teaching about the necessity.
For example, what do you mean by going out of your comfort zone?
Well, you kind of open up yourself, make yourself vulnerable. That's outside a lot of people's comfort zone. If you do that in your relationship, you get closer, right?
Yeah. Think about something in your relationship with your wife that you do, or in your family that maybe you'd rather not do or do a different way, but you do it because you know it's important to your wife or to your kids. And think about something that your wife or your children might do because they know it's important to you, they wouldn't necessarily do had it not been important to you. Every relationship has this give and take. right? And so that's a little bit about the parashat. Now,
a question here.
yeah.
In line number 14.
What page are you on?
It's
What chapter and verse we can all
it's
look.
same. Yeah, it's 6.
525.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So it says, you shall bring grain offering, baked slices of pleasing odor to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
A pleasing odor to the Lord. So,
Great question.
what are we supposed to interpret from that?
Great question. You want a great answer? Not from me, from our sages of old. So this is a very frequent expression in the book of Leviticus. It says that the sacrifices were Ishe Reach Nichoach Lashem. They were an exquisite aroma to God. What does that mean? Does God have nostrils? And he goes like, I really want that stew. No, it's anthropomorphic, which means we're attributing human attributes, traits to the divine. Why? Because, as Rabbi Ishmael of antiquity used to say, Dibra Torah bilshon bnei Adam. The Torah speaks in the language of regular people, the average Joe Schmo. Everybody understands the Torah in a manner commensurate with their intellectual and spiritual development. And the ideal, according to Maimonides, is the philosopher walks in the inner gardens of Torah. Or Kabbalah is called Nishmata Deoraita, which is Aramaic for the soul of the Torah. It's like our body has multiple layers, right? Somebody, somebody who grew up in a very remote part of the world where he learned nothing about human biology might think that that's what we are, right? We have the skin here. And they look at a person, it's like, yeah, that's what you are. They have no idea that there's a whole world inside here with a main battery and with pipes. There's a whole city, right? So similarly, the Torah has multiple layers. And the main explanation the rabbis give is this. When God sees that it's a rainy day and you have to come from the valley to a Torah class, and you're not saying, oh, it's raining and there might be traffic and I could always just watch something on Netflix, and you still make the drive here in the rain and you still suffer the rabbi's jokes, then it is an exquisite aroma to Hashem. God has nachat, has spiritual pleasure. When God sees each and every one of us going out of their comfort zone, walking the extra mile, doing something extra, then that gives God pleasure. Right? When you stretch yourself, right, and you give of yourself beyond your comfort, that gives God spiritual pleasure. That's the idea. It's beautiful, right?
Is that Maimonides or?
That's an ancient midrash. It's an ancient midrash. What? So, now, if you want to look at the prophetic reading for this Shabbat, Shabbat Hagadol, Shabbat before Pesach, go to page 1289.
1289.
Yeah. 1289. It's taken from the book of Malachi. Malachi, no, Malachi. It's not Melachim. Oh. Melachim would be kings. That's it's very similar. Malachi, I think in English, 1289, was one of the minor prophets.
Oh, Shabbat Hagadol. I see.
When we say the minor prophets, doesn't mean that he wasn't a big-time prophet. It means that it's a smaller book compared to the books of Jeremiah and Isaiah. It's smaller in scope, in number of words and pages. So what's going on in Malachi? He starts and says on 1289, "V'arva Hashem inchat Yudav Yerushalayim," that the offerings that we in Israel and Jerusalem would bring to Hashem will be exquisite and pleasant, like in ancient times. There will be a time when we will get our act together and we will give God the same kind of pleasure that our ancestors did. We will up our Torah game, so to speak. V'karavti alechem lemishpat. I'll bring you to judgment. V'aiti ed memaher. And I'm going to settle the scores with those who deal with witchcraft and sorcerers. What's the problem with these things, like sorcerers and? Are we allowed to do a seance? Are we allowed to go to a psychic? By the way,
I don't
No.
think so.
why not?
Idol worship.
Why aren't we allowed? First of all, because it's an affront to human dignity. God is radically free. We're in God's image. We're also radically free. If I go to a psychic and I take him or her seriously, and they tell me something, and I'm going to say, oh, that's what's going to happen to me, it's as if I'm stripping myself of my own freedom, of my own free will, of my own divine image. It's an affront to human dignity, to our own godliness. That's why King Saul got into trouble in the Bible because he went to a woman who was like a communicator with the deceased. And then the prophet Samuel came and rebuked him. So God says in verse 5, I'm going to settle the score also with those who take false testimony, people who lie in a court of law. Uveoshkei schar sachir, people who don't pay employees what they should. Right? Almana ve'atom ve'ter ger, widows, orphans, and the strangers, people who come here from other countries who don't have employment rights, are not protected. Amar Hashem Tzvaot, right? So look at the concern with morality, right? Ki ani Hashem lo shaniti, right? I haven't changed, Verse 7, since many generations ago you strayed from my laws and you didn't observe. Shuva elai v'ashuva alechem. It's beautiful. Shuva elai means return to me, says God, and I will return to you. V'amartem b'men nashuv. And you're asking me, how will we return to you? Verse 8, Haikba Adam Elokim. Are you going to tell me how much to give charity? I'm going to tell you how much to give. You're not the ones calling the shots. Bring everything that you need to bring to charity. And then on verse at the end of verse 10, it's very beautiful. It says, "V'harikoti lachem bracha al blidai." I will bring forth to you a bracha, an incessant bracha, a limitless bracha. So the Hasidic masters teach us that the word bracha, blessing, is connected to the word brecha, which in Rabbinic Hebrew means like a spring of water. It's like when you say a lot of brachot, when you eat, when you drink, when you pray, you're filling yourself with that energy, with that life, that power, vitality of God. You are sanctifying yourself when you're saying a lot of brachot. So you do blessed things, and I will make you blessed as a result. You remember a few years ago that terrible thing that happened that started a war in Israel when Hamas terrorists kidnapped 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank and murdered them. And the whole Jewish world was praying for them for like a week or more until they found their bodies. And somebody asked Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who's one of the great rabbis of our times in Jerusalem, where did all our prayers go? Millions of people prayed for them. So he said, I'll tell you where they went. First of all, they went on to Hashem and they elevated the souls of the deceased, but they also sanctified us. The fact that we exhibited such an exemplary mode of Ahavat Yisrael, boundless love of every Jew, the fact that we prayed for these boys and we said so many brachot for them, we sanctified ourselves. We took ourselves to the next level, spiritually, right? Now, where was I? Now, I'm going to skip to the end of the Haftarah, verse 23 on verse 1291. Verse 23 on page 1291. And you see here that one of the reasons it's called Shabbat Hagadol, the great Sabbath before Pesach, is that Pesach was the original redemption from Egypt, and we are waiting for the final cosmic redemption, when the entire world will be redeemed, right? That's why on the 8th day of Pesach, we who live outside Israel read the prophet Isaiah's vision about the time in which a wolf will dwell with the lamb and there will be universal peace. Maimonides explains, what does it mean that the wolf shall lie with the lamb? That big nations will not devour small nations, right? That Russia won't eat the Ukraine, right? So it ends this haftarah that the rabbis put for us on our liturgy, on our reading for the Shabbat for Pesach, with a hope and aspiration for the final messianic redemption, right? So look at verse 23. Hine anochi, behold, I am sending you. Sholech lachem et Eliyahu, I'm sending you Elijah, right? And of course, we also have a cup for Elijah. We're going to open the door for Elijah for the Seder, right? I'm sending to you Elijah the prophets. Lifnei bo hayom Hashem hagadol, before the great and awesome day of Hashem, the day of the final redemption, the ultimate redemption, right?
But a dreadful day. A dreadful day.
That's how it's translated here?
Yeah.
You're using,
Dreadful day. Yeah.
It's interesting. One way to understand why it's, you can translate Norah as awesome or dreadful. It's possible to say it means dreadful because we have a concept in Judaism called Chevelei Mashiach, which means the birth pangs of the Mashiach, of the Messiah. Just like a woman, before she gives birth, she undergoes excruciating pain, right? And then the best possible things happens, right? So.
Or when you're passing a kidney stone.
Well, that's a little different. So.
Not the same.
So similarly, there was a French poet, Guillaume Apollinaire, and he wrote in one of his poems, La joie venait toujours après la peine. Joy always succeeds pain.
After pain.
Right? The first chapter of Tehillim that Hasidim read is chapter 30 of Psalms of Tehillim. It says, Hafachta mispodi lemecholi. It's very beautiful. It's overcoming depression and darkness in life. Hafachta mispodi lemecholi. You've turned my own eulogy into a dance. Pitachta saki. You opened my mourning sackcloth and girded me with joy. Vatazreni simcha. So, Shimon Peres once said, when he was turned 80, they had a TV show about him. He says, sometimes in life, moments before success, it seems to you as if you are standing on the edge of the abyss.
But they say it's the darkest before the light.
Exactly, before dawn. That's right. So before Dawn Johnson, Miami
Before-
Vice, right?
That one.
So oftentimes before a great historical breakthrough, there's utter darkness, right? The state of Israel came into being 3 years after the ovens in Auschwitz were extinguished, right? That's a powerful example of what it means that they often say that, before it gets good, it has to get really bad, right? It's also an optimistic life view that we have as Jews, that the Talmud calls it Yerida letzorech aliyah, a descent for the sake of an ascent, right? We went into Egypt. The Torah later on says Egypt was our iron furnace that molded our national character. It gave us empathy for other groups of people who are oppressed and enslaved, and it also cemented our spiritual tenacity as a people, right? All the different enemies that tried to destroy us, they only fortified us further and further.
How do we say in Spanish?
Lo que dijo en francés.
No hay mal que por bien no venga.
Oh, no, that's true.
There is a very short.
Yeah, how does it go?
There is nothing bad
Mhm.
that doesn't come to bring good.
Yeah. Nietzsche, the German thinker, said, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." But I don't think it's always true, actually. But in what you say in Spanish
No
is
hay mal que
is
por bien no venga.
that I do think is right. You can find a blessing in adversity, and we as a people excel in that. Now, so what's going to happen in that time when the world will significantly move towards a redemptive state? On verse 24, Veheshiv lev avot al banim. Hashem will restore the hearts of the ancestors to the children. Velev banim al avotam, and the hearts of the children on their ancestors. In other words,
20. Where'd you see 24?
verse 24,
Where?
at the bottom of 1291.
Page 1291.
It says 23.
And there's
And
24
then
after.
2 lines before
24.
last.
I have
A different edition?
yeah.
So go to the next page.
Okay. There's no next page. It's done.
Can I see it first?
Sure.
Thanks.
Please verify.
Yeah. Oh, you're here. verse 24, my dear. Right here.
Oh, in the Hebrew, but there's no English translation for
Oh,
it.
there's no English
Yeah.
translation. Oh, okay.
Pardonnez-moi. I
No,
was
it's
not
okay.
clear enough.
Hold on. I'm curious.
In here too. It's the same.
24. Right here.
What does this say?
25.
My default. I'm going blind.
No, this is a mistake.
Oh, it's a mistake. It does say 23.
It's 23, 24, and this should say 25. But you have it.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
good. No problem. So what does it mean that when we're going to move towards fulfilling our destiny as individuals, as a nation, as
But I
a
just want to call the
species?
attention to the fact that this 23 is the same words as 23.
Yeah, it's not a mistake. It's repeated
It
on
just-
purpose.
yeah, okay.
It's everybody has it as 23. It's not a mistake.
Yeah.
It's repeated. No, it's okay. How would you know that? Makes sense. So what does it mean that God will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers? What do you think it means?
Well, the love for the son and the love for the father.
Everybody reconnects. Where was the Jewish people born? Where were we born as a nation?
Egypt.
No.
No. In a hospital in Manhattan, Mount Sinai, right?
Over on this side of town, it's part of the country, Cedars of Lebanon or Cedars
Right.
Sinai.
So exactly. So we were born at Mount Sinai, and the mystical statement is that spiritually speaking, not physically, spiritually speaking, all Jewish souls, past, present, and future, were present at Sinai, including people who later on embraced Judaism of their own accord as converts. But at some point,
I'm sorry, Rabbi.
Yes.
So you're saying that the birth of the Jewish nation was when we received
as a nation,
as a nation.
Okay,
but I was always under the impression that the birth of the Jewish nation was with Abraham.
you could say that too. It's only that Abram, it was him and his family, but we weren't quantitatively, in terms of sheer numbers, we were not a nation. We were a handful of people. And then we were a family, and then we were an extended family, and then we were a collection of tribes. Right? I guess you can say we were already a people in Egypt, in terms of sheer numbers, before we got the Torah. Which actually brings us to what we started our class with. We said there are two ways to think about our individual lives and about the Jewish life, fate and destiny. So, in the beginning of the book of Exodus, we have someone calling us for the first time the Jewish people. Somebody says, Hinei am b'nei Israel, behold the people of Israel. Anybody knows who said that? Who is the first person on the record in the Torah calling us a nation, a people?
Pharaoh?
Very good, the Pharaoh.
So it's the first time. Okay.
So sometimes
That's what I was
people
gonna
need
ask
to
you.
be reminded that they are Jewish by anti-Semitism, right? And that's Jewish
I
fate.
can think of a better way.
That's Jewish fate,
And that's
Right.
what has kept us, unfortunately.
right? And the flip side, if you like, the higher level of being Jewish, is not Jewish fate. It's imposed upon you that there are people who wish you ill. But there's a higher level which is embracing Judaism as a calling, as a vocation, and that's the idea of Jewish destiny. So you could say, to build upon your good point, Ralph, that in a sense we were born as a nation in terms of our political fate in Egypt, but we were born in terms of our destiny at Mount Sinai when we received the Torah, right? So, but over the years, we have a concept in Judaism called Yeridat Hadorot, which means the generational descent, which means that our grandparents, think about your own grandparents, our grandparents were much more steeped, in most cases, with Torah and Judaism than we are,
For sure.
right? There's kind of like a generational decline.
Not for me or my mom.
Okay, there are always exceptions, but if you go enough generations back, you'll
well,
see.
yeah,
you
we
know?
had rabbis.
Right? There you
On
go.
both sides.
So I think that maybe this is what the prophet Malachi means when he's speaking in the name of Hashem. He says, the generations will reunify in Torah, in sanctity, right? We will kind of unify again with generations of old who were on a higher spiritual plane than we are.
Well, here's an interesting observation, as I remember that we had rabbis on my mother's side and my father's side, but on my mother's side.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that I think it had to do with the fact that my grandmother was one of two sisters, no brothers, and my mom is a girl with no siblings, an only child.
Okay.
And in Greece, they didn't teach girls Torah.
Yeah.
So that's why you have, in my family anyway,
Mhm.
two generations that just kind of skipped over because
Mhm.
it's just a woman. But then my mom got interested later in life, and of course I've always been.
Well, thank God it was changed, even in ultra-Orthodox circles. Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was a leader of modern Orthodoxy in the last half a century and more, of the 20th century, he instituted a mixed school for boys and girls. He instituted Talmud study for women at Stern College at the Yeshiva University. He taught it himself.
In America.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Greece.
Yeah. The Lubavitcher Rebbe introduced Hasidic studies and even halachic studies. So we've gone a long way since then. Not to mention the liberal strands of Judaism, which also have, rabbinical ordination for women. So thank God we've gone a long way.
Rabbi,
But yeah,
But not here at this temple.
Question.
correct. Oh, we do have woman clergy here, and she leads women's services. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it true that once upon a time women were allowed to wear tefillin?
There is a legend. There is a legend that Rashi's daughters, Rashi only had daughters.
I read
He's
one of
related
the
to Larry Klumek. and to me. So Rashi only had daughters. And we know who his sons-in-law were because they're their own, they have their own commentaries on the Torah. One was called Rabbeinu Tam, who has a different kind of tefillin than the Rashi tefillin. That's the one that the Hasidim switched tefillin in the middle of the prayer. We have Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir. So somebody circulated a legend, because it's a good legend for a lot of people, that Rashi's daughters put on tefillin. We have absolutely no text that says that. It's just like a little bit of wishful thinking. You could say maybe they did, but there's nothing that indicates
Nothing written.
Nothing. We have no historical evidence that that's true. But there was a novel that came out maybe 10 years ago or so in 2 volumes, I think. Maybe
I
one
think it's
volume.
3 volumes.
It's
Didn't he have 3 daughters? Each daughter got
It's
a...
called Rashi's Daughters.
And then each
And in
daughter...
that, and it's historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
In that work of historical fiction, I think the author took the poetic license to say that his daughters put on tefillin. But it's not historically based. Okay? Yes.
Did Rashi have 3 daughters?
I'm not sure if he had 3 or 4. I'm not
Each
sure.
daughter got a book.
Okay.
I read the first one so far.
The president of Sephardic Temple gave her the book on the
Make
Bima.
a book
Yeah.
report for us.
Mark, what?
Yeah, so on the remainder of line 24.
Yeah, let's finish that. Yeah.
Yes, Schneider.
And so he will restore the hearts of the fathers and the sons, the ancestors and the children. Pen avo v'yekiti et haaretz cherem. So, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. In other words, if it's if it's not going to work the good way, it's going to work the bad way. It reminds me of a statement by the late Abba Ibn, who was Israel's foremost diplomat in the pre-televised era, right? Abba Ibn used to say the following: human beings often act in accordance with reason after they have exhausted all alternative remedies.
After they have exhausted?
All alternative remedies.
In other words, our instinct is
It's
to
kind
be
of like
rational.
you see someone, and I'm not dissimilar from, let's say, somebody like that, who, God forbid, gets a heart attack. And then they start watching themselves and what the exercise, the nutrition, right? We learn the hard way. Sometimes we have to get a baseball bat in the head in order to get our act together. It's just something about human nature.
Can you quote Abba even again?
Yeah. Human beings
Yeah.
often act in accordance with reason. After they have exhausted all alternative remedies. And the similar thing is that the Talmud says that when we were given the Torah at Mount Sinai, God took, that's a midrash, it's a rabbinic story in the
What's
Talmud.
the last word after alternative?
Remedies.
Remedies.
So
I think that goes along with when all else fails, look at the directions. Read the directions.
yeah. Follow the instructions, yeah. Right. So, so where were we? Lost my thread. Oh, so when we received the Torah at Mount Sinai, the Talmud says that God took the mountain, metaphorically speaking, right, not to be taken literally at face value, lifted the mountain, put it over our heads, and say, if you accept the Torah, great. If not, I'm going to drop it on you, and this will be your burial place, your place of burial. So there's a whole discussion about this. What does that mean? So one way to understand it is a verse from Tehillim, I think, that I chose where I was ordained at the theological seminary, each student was asked to pick a verse that they will call you when they give you your rabbinic ordination. It's a very beautiful verse. It says in Hebrew, King David writes, Lulei Toratcha she'ashuai azavadeti ve'oni. Had it not been for the Torah, the source of my delight, then I would have perished in my impoverishment. In other words, a life without Torah, Rabbi Sessler says, it's possible to live without Torah, but for many of us it would be akin to a life without music or a life without poetry. It's a diminished life, right? So there's somebody wrote a book about Nietzsche called Life as Literature. Judaism is life as poetry. You know, if you think about it, you recite the Kiddush, it's poetry. When you hear the Torah, it's poetry. It brings a poetic dimension to life beyond the monotonous chatter of everyday life. So one way to understand the idea that God put the mountain over our head is, yeah, I mean, if you're not going to have song and poem in your life, then life is going to squash you and crash you. And the second view is that other rabbis say in that Talmudic tractate, I think it's tractate Shabbat, I'm not sure, that he said, I will put the mountain on you like a chuppah canopy, like a wedding canopy. So it's...
I have an elementary question. So we received the Torah at Mount Sinai, but we all picture Moses just coming down with the tablets with the Ten Commandments, but there's all this.
He was very upset and he wasn't feeling well. That's why God told him, take 2 tablets. Anyway, what is it?
Well, the Torah is more than 2 tablets.
Well, we're talking about the 2 tablets pertain to the 10 Commandments.
Okay, but that was only receiving the 10 Commandments, not the whole Torah.
Yeah, and there are other verses that say later on, Vayichtov Moshe, and Moses wrote this Torah, and the rabbis say, we have a chronological principle in Torah, coined by a Spanish rabbi, Antonio Banderas, no, I'm kidding, Avraham Ben Ezra. He's a great sage and a master grammarian. We have his name on the tapestry we have facing Kandioti, right? When you enter the synagogue, what Abikassis did for us?
Yeah.
You see Ibn Ezra. So Ibn Ezra, he was a master grammarian, and he coined a rabbinic principle that everybody accepts and adheres to, which is En Mukdam v'Meuchar b'Torah. There is no earlier and later in the Torah. If you're reading, most regular books, then it's chronological, right? You're moving from the more distant past to the more recent past. But the Torah, sometimes you can be in the middle of the Torah and read something that took place. You can read something in the book of Numbers, the 4th book of the Torah, that actually took place in the time of the 2nd book of Exodus or the 3rd book. We go back and forth in time sometimes. Does that relate to your question?
Yeah, but still, at that moment, when we say we got the Torah, he only came down with 2 tablets.
That's what the Torah sees fit to say at this point. But later on, there are other allusions to Moses going up after parashat Yitro. And there, some of the commentators said that's when he wrote the Torah at large. And of course,
how long were they camping out at Mount Sinai?
40 days and 40 nights he was up there.
Okay, but 40 days and 40 nights he came down with 2 tablets.
Right, and then he came up again.
Yeah, well, after he broke those,
yeah.
he went back, but still the same 2 tablets.
But he memorized all the other stuff. He just needed a symbol, but it was all in his head.
Whatever, there are many ways to understand it.
So the Torah was written by men?
Well, that depends on your ideology. The Orthodox view is that God, in a sense, spiritually conveyed the Torah to Moses, and Moses wrote it down. Other people, who are not Orthodox say it was the 10 Commandments. Now, what's beautiful amongst many other things, is that the rabbis of the Torah are attuned to this. And some people say both, God gave Moses both the Torah that we read in synagogue on Shabbat, but also the oral Torah, the Mishnah and the Talmud. But the Mishnah and the Talmud wasn't written. It was passed orally from generation to generation. That's why we call it the oral Torah, until the Romans kicked us out of Israel. At the end of the 2nd century, we decided to write down the Mishnah. But Moses was given that too, according to that idea. So once I was in a Torah class in an Orthodox synagogue, and somebody asked, is the Talmud also from Sinai? So that rabbi told him something brilliant. He said, not only that, the new Torah idea that you're going to come up with in 10 minutes, that was also given at Sinai. So it's a mystical view that all conceivable spiritual insights were condensed into that one moment in time beyond time. It's a very sophisticated idea that's going on here, really.
What about the writers from exile? In exile, they were putting the books together. Some of the stories are...
Yeah, so that's a scholarly, academic view. Yeah, historical view. I'm talking about like the conversation within rabbinic literature per se. But there was some... What was the theme that you were questioning me about? Because I think I had one more point to say about that. Oh, yeah. There's a beautiful story in the Talmud that shows how the rabbis are attuned to that question of historicity, what happened historically. And they tell you the story is that when Moses was receiving the Torah, God took Moses on a special flight. He got him a chopper, put him on the roof somewhere in one of the Wilshire Towers, and he took him up to heaven. And he saw Rabbi Akiva, a 2nd century sage, teaching a Torah class. So he sat in the back because he wanted to feel the AC. And he didn't understand the word Rabbi Akiva was saying. Because Rabbi Akiva was doing interpretations of the Talmud. Moses didn't learn those things. So Moses tells him, I don't understand anything. Why did you give me the Torah? You should have given this guy. I don't even understand what he's talking about. And God tells him in Hebrew, zip it. That's the way it occurred to me. That's what I saw fit to do. And then Moses sees that Rabbi Akiva was executed in a very torturous and gruesome way by the Romans for teaching Torah at a time in which it was punishable by death. And so Moses tells Rabbi Akiva, Zot Torah v'zot schara, such is Torah and such is its reward. And again, God tells him, zip it. That's what I saw fit to do. So that Talmudic story is very brilliant and very powerful, and it tells us two things. That the rabbis do understand the progression of Jewish literature over time historically. And they're also dealing with the question of theodicy. Theodicy is the question of why do we have terrible things in this world, like the Lakers not making it to the playoffs for 4 years and lousy air conditioning. No, seriously, why are there terrible things in the world? Why is there so much suffering? And when Job asks that question in the book of Job, the rabbis hate the book of Job. You know why? Because they're right, it's really bad theodicy, it's really bad theology. Job at the end gets a new family, and he makes his fortune again. What is this nonsense? That's not real, right? It's not realistic. So the rabbis don't like the book of Job. They say the Job, lo haya velo nivra, never happened. Lo haya velo nivra, it's fiction. They really don't like Job. They think it's bad theology. But Job at some point, challenges God. We always challenge God, right? Abraham challenges God at Sodom and Gomorrah. King David challenges God in Tehillim. Until when will the wicked rejoice? Until when will Nazis live to 100 in South America? Right? And Jeremiah says, how is it that avot achlu boser v'shinei bneihem tikena? How is it that parents ate unripe fruits and their children's teeth decayed? How can it be that two parents are criminals and crack addicts, and then their children are born into drug addiction and poverty, right? So we always challenge God. You know, it's a Jewish sport. It's called chutzpah klapei shemaya, chutzpah towards heaven. So it's something very. So what does Job say to God? So how does God respond to Job? He says, how can you allow a world with so many calamities? God says, it's four very powerful words in Hebrew. It says, Efo hayita beyosdi aretz. Where were you when I created the earth? Yeah.
So, right, so basically challenging God, whatever he decided to do that you might disagree with, it's not sinful because you're going against God's will.
Well, you know, the beauty is...
Is that what we're saying? That
we're
entitled as
first of all, we're a people, an intellectual people. We always question.
Right.
Notice that there is no stupid child in the Haggadah. There's the Chacham, the wise, and there's a child who doesn't know how to ask questions. All of Judaism is dialogical questions and answers. The Talmud is the best example of that. There was a Jewish American physicist, Easy Rabi was his name. He won the Nobel Prize. Asked him, how did you get so far in physics? He said, we know all the kids in the neighborhood come home. Their mothers would ask them, what did you learn in school today? My mother would tell me, did you ask a good question today? But there's a thing called She'elat Chacham, a question of a Chacham. A wise person's question is within the system. You're within the system of Torah. You're engaged with Torah. You're connected to Torah. You study Torah. You celebrate Jewish life, and you question from within. Right? You don't slam the door on Judaism and walk away. You're engaged.
A not well-learned person is not entitled to question. Is what you just said.
Well, it's complicated.
Did I understand
well,
that?
it does say in the Mishnah that the ignoramus cannot be pious. If I don't know anything, I don't know how to light Shabbat candles, then I can't be observant because I don't have the knowledge how to observe. But there's a flip side to it. On the one hand, we're encouraged to challenge and to think and to question. On the other hand, the Talmud says that it is incumbent upon a person to say a bracha, a blessing, for the good and for the bad. And who does it? We all do it. We stand on the grave of our loved one and we say a blessing. We say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam dayan ha'emet. Blessed are you, God, who is the judge of truth. And then there's the kriya, the tearing of the garment. So we do make a blessing, which is a way of kind of reconciling ourselves, accepting. Right. So let's.
But when God said, "Where were you when I created the earth?" What was He trying to say?
He's trying to say you haven't been here for the whole time.
Oh.
It's kind of like, think of human civilization as a movie. We only get to see a minute and a half of a 2-hour movie. We haven't been here before, and we don't know what's going to be after our lifetime.
Very interesting.
So, last thing I'll say, why does Malachi say here that God is sending us Elijah the prophet to bring the Messianic era? Because Elijah was willing to take the sword and fight. He fought against idolatrous prophets. So only those who are willing to fight will earn the peace. Right? So the only reason we get to live and exist is because there were millions of people who gave their lives, right, against the forces of evil, Nazism, Stalinism. Today, people protecting us from ISIS. So the warriors merit the peace, right? All right, so we'll still have, God willing, a class next week before Pesach.
Okay.
Rabbi, what's the chapter in Pirkei Avot that we read at this time of the year? What chapters?
Usually the tradition is to read it between Pesach and Shavuot.
Between Pesach and Shavuot.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
after Pesach.
Yeah, and
those are?
There's 6 chapters to Pirkei Avot. There's 6 different chapters to
To
Pirkei
come
Avot.
Tuesday
I
night.
understand, but which particular chapters you?
Every Shabbat we read a different chapter. I'll let you know when it starts, if you like. But we're not doing that custom here. I'm teaching Pirkei Avot on Tuesday nights. We're now in the 6th chapter. All right?
And then what?
Thank you.